Welcome to Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast that's your ultimate guide to mastering personal finances and unlocking the secrets of entrepreneurship. Each week, we dive into the world of personal finance and business development and have fascinating conversations with industry experts, seasoned entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their insights, strategies, and stories to help you get ahead in life. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur looking to scale your business or someone just starting out on your financial path, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable insights.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Chris Ray Poniotu, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And today's free tip of the episode is do not feel guilty about making the correct financial decisions for you and your family. Now, I'm going to explain briefly. So what's going to happen over time, especially if you're younger listening in, if you start making the right decisions financially, you're probably not going to feel it today or tomorrow or in the near future. But over time, the value of compounding works in incredible ways. And I bring this up because actually, from my own situation, in my 20s, I lived well within my means, as well as my wife after we met, and we started staying true to the Capitalize Your Financial framework. And at 32, or after a decade of reinvesting into ourselves, that compounding has started to take effect. And the reason why I bring this up is you are going to see friends, and in some cases even family, guilt you into doing what you were supposed to be doing all along. And the reason why they get upset about it is they didn't do it. So don't feel guilty about that. Do the right thing and be happy about it. So enough of the free advice. Today's episode is going to be a unique one. We are going to go over Americans' biggest financial regrets. So Michael S. Fisher through thinkadvisor.com actually came out with this a couple days ago, and we're recording this as of March 2024. And I messaged my team saying, you know what? I'm not going to look at these. What we're going to do is we're going to go through them live. So I don't really know what they are. And in real time, we're just going to elaborate on them and say, okay, is this correct? Do I think there's a little bit more of a nuance to this discussion? Is there something that you need to look out for? Or is it just pretty black and white? Like, yeah, that's a pretty bad regret. So without further ado, let's get into Americans' biggest financial regrets. So now, right off the bat, the article says 74% of American adults have at least one financial regret, while 20% purport to have no financial regret at all. Well, that's a bunch of BS. Everyone has a regret in life. According to a survey from Bankrate, the regrets arise around issues of saving and spending. Okay. Talk about how many people there were in the survey, blah, 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 blah. The survey listed 6 major regrets and asked respondents to name their biggest, period. 12% replied something else, and 6% said they didn't know. That's also BS. When you have a regret in life, you definitely know what it is, okay? 48% of those with at least one financial regret reported that their stress level over their top regret had increased in the past year, compared with 12% who said their stress level had decreased. Among the latter group, 40% said their stress level over their financial regret has stayed about the same in the last year. 56% of respondents who regretted not saving enough for emergencies said their stress level has increased over the past 12 months. All right, and so with that fun little fact, let's go through. It looks like there's going to be 6. So the number 6, Americans' biggest financial regret is not saving enough for children's education. Okay, and conveniently, they break it down by generations. So Gen Zers, which, you know, if you've got a lot of kids, there could be some issues there, but 5% of Gen Zers, 4% millennials, 4% of Gen Xers, and 2% of baby boomers. Now, this one's kind of an interesting fact because I think a lot of, first off, baby boomers, you got to think about where they came from. They grew up obviously learning from their elders, and their elders grew up in the heart of the Great Depression. And so a lot of these people, I'm blanking on what was before baby boomers. I mean, now it's just mainly dead, but you get my point. This generation beforehand, they were so frugal, understandably so, that instilled on these baby boomers. And so when baby boomers were growing up, it was really just save, period. And then with children coming into play, I mean, kids are going to be more expensive. So, and God forbid if you paid for their private school or college. Gen Xers, not as shocking. Millennials, not as shocking that a lot of them haven't thought of it. It's actually interesting on Gen Z that not saving enough for children's education is within the top 6. But I actually think that's a good thing because in my mind, that means that the youngest generation that is having kids is really thinking about the future in their future, meaning their kids. So that one's kind of an interesting one. Now, the number 5 biggest financial regret for Americans, buying more of a home than you can afford. Okay. Now, Gen Zers, 6%, Millennials, 5%, Gen Xers, 3%, and Baby Boomers, 1%. Now, this one's a little bit more straightforward. You got to ask yourself when these Baby Boomers bought their home. Now, fascinating because a lot of these Baby Boomers bought their homes, assuming you've stayed in them for a long period of time, in the 70s or 80s. So at the time, interest rates were staggering. I remember, I think my mom was telling me that when she bought her first home, she was ecstatic that her 30-year mortgage was 17%, a 17% interest rate, which is wild. And so over time, from the 80s up until about 2021, interest rates have pretty steadily decreased. And obviously in 2021, they were dang near to zero. And so what happens was over time, these baby boomers, what would happen is you could, and I got to watch myself here with compliance with refinancing, but they would either refinance when interest rates were lower just to save on cash flow, or they would cash out and refinance to go reinvest it or whatever the case may be. And so with Gen Xers and millennials and especially Gen Z who have more of a regret, you got to think about it. The younger the generation, the sooner that they've bought their home, and especially for people that have bought their home in even 2020 or 2021 when interest rates were at an all-time historic low, you see a lot of people now where 2022 and 2023 and now we're in 2024 have come around and interest rates have come up. It looked great on paper at the time to go and buy these homes. However, due to rates rising to where they have been at that historic low, anytime you want to do anything with the equity in your home, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Obviously, things happen, but you can't really do a whole heck of a lot. So I actually know of a lot of people that did buy more of a home than they can afford, and I don't know if they would ever admit it or not, but they're starting to feel it, and it's a bummer. But it makes sense that that's a pretty big regret. Also, keeping up with the Joneses, that's always a big one. And you all know how I feel about that. Just ignore it because most Joneses are broke as hell anyway. So number 4. Ooh, this is a fascinating one. Actually, it's not really that fascinating when you think about it. Taking on too much student loan debt. So baby boomers are at 2%, Gen Xers 6%, millennials 8%, and Gen Zers 7%. Got a little bell curve going. Obviously, the baby boomers, I get it, because back in the day, college wasn't nearly as expensive as it is in our current environment. And then Gen Xers, it got a little bit more expensive. And frankly, for millennials, I totally get why almost 1 out of 10 of you feel a massive regret on taking out your student loan debt. Because let's face it, you go to the college of your dreams. And God forbid if you pay out of state and you go to a public university. Well, let's say that you go to whatever college, just like a nice college, and you have to take out a student loan of $100,000. I'm just making this number up. And then you get out of school and all of these colleges have promised you that you are going to have this dream job. And not only is that not there, most people don't have a job. So I'm actually going to use, and I'm going to give my brother a compliment here. So when I went to my brother's college graduation ceremony, and going to University of Oregon, there are obviously thousands of schools, or excuse me, thousands of kids. So you don't just have one massive graduation. It's by every major. And I forget how many people were in my brother's graduating class within his major. I think it was a couple hundred. My brother was one of 3 that had a job. And how do I know this? One of these professors had this brilliant idea. I'm being extremely sarcastic here, of surprising the kids, of saying, hey, when you graduate, you go across the stage, you say who you are, you say where you're from, obviously your major, which is stupid because everyone majored with the same thing, and what you want to do after college that's going to change the world. And almost every other kid said, I would love a job. I would love a job. I would love it. They didn't have a job. And so a lot of these millennials have realized, wow, like how valuable is my college education? Probably not in a lot of ways. Okay. Obviously, if you go on to be a doctor or an attorney or CPA or an engineer, something that requires like a master's or continuing education, or if you have a return on your investment of your degree, then it's going to be worth it. But, I think we're starting to see that that's not the case as much anymore, which is why it doesn't shock me that Gen Zers don't have as much regret as the millennials, because a lot of these younger kids, or just people in general, are starting to wake up to the fact that education is not nearly as valuable as the knowledge that you're learning in the grand scheme of life. And also student loans. I mean, I don't know anyone that's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to pay down $100,000 at whatever the interest rate is today. But the number 3 biggest financial regret of Americans, not saving enough for emergency expenses. So this was 14% of the study. So baby boomers are at 9%, which that's pretty crazy to me, actually, because you would think by the time you get to that age, 1 out of 10, that just seems staggeringly high to me. 13% of Gen Xers, as far as not saving enough for emergency expenses. Millennials, 17%. And here we go. The Gen Zers, 21% of you. So 1 out of 5, a little bit more than that, are regretting not saving enough for an emergency expense. So part of this shocks the absolute heck out of me. And then the other part, it has no shock whatsoever. Let's start with the no whatsoever. Emergency funds aren't fun to talk about. They're really boring. I mean, you're setting money aside to sit there for an emergency that, knock on wood, hopefully will never happen. And so when you do that, it can be really tempting to take that money and do something with it, especially if you see things like the next hot stock that is, just taking off, and you've got the FOMO, the fear of missing out, or all of your friends are getting into the real estate game and you want to hop aboard that bandwagon, or everyone's becoming an entrepreneur because it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, being sarcastic, and you want to go do that. So you cash out all of that emergency fund to go reinvest into your dreams. I'm not saying that there is a right time for all of those things to possibly occur, but when you're doing that with your emergency fund, it's no longer an emergency fund. It's like slush fund and fun money, and that's not fun. And there's no slush about it, because then when you actually do need that emergency fund and you don't have that money off to the side, you're screwed. And that's when you start to compound in the worst ways possible. Now, it also makes total sense to me why, as the generations are getting younger and younger, the regret for emergency funds is greater, because let's face it, baby boomers have lived through the 70s and 80s. the dot-com bubble and burst, the Great Recession. And so baby boomers have been kicked in the teeth enough to understand the value of an emergency fund, because more often than not, when you're going through all those troubling times, they've probably had to tap into it. Gen Xers, it's the same thing. Millennials and Gen Zers, this is where it gets really interesting. So a lot of millennials started investing in the early 2010s. Why is that topical? You missed all of the chaos. You missed the dot-com bubble and burst, and you were at the tail end of the Great Recession, which was statistically one of the best times to start investing. So there was this behavioral finance cloud of judgment where you go, oh, I can just invest and earn whatever the average market return was, which again, compliance, pipe down. This is not investment advice or guaranteeing, but man, from 2009 up until 2021, the end of 2021, I think the market was up like 15% on average. So even if you were like an idiot of an investor, like you still did remarkably well, and compared to historically what long-term investments, do more often than not. And then Gen Zers, if you started investing in the 2015s or 16s, then you get into the meme stock craze, because that's one of the most recent things that we've looked at. And then real estate just absolutely exploded unnecessarily. And 2022 woke a lot of people up, because that's when interest rates started to rise, a lot of these investment values started to decrease. People started tapping into their portfolio as an emergency fund, and they got kicked in the teeth really quickly because they learned, oh, I actually need an emergency fund, and now I know the value of it. Now, the good news for all of you is that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So if you have not done this already, if you go online and look up an online savings account, if you have not opened one, gosh dang it, go and do it. Okay. A lot of these, it's free. And due to the fact that interest rates are as high as they are, you're actually going to be earning something for it. Now, I'm not going to say any specific names due to conflicts and all that, but there are some online savings accounts out there where you can earn 4.5%, maybe even 5% on your money. It's FDIC insured. And so if you have not capitalized on your savings, which again, for those of you that are new to the show, it's about 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. And if you don't know, basically what I'm talking about in that regard, whatever your monthly expenses are, times it by 3 to 6, that's how much you should have in your savings. Once you have capitalized on your savings, you will be ahead of the 14% of those that were in this study that regret not having enough in the emergency fund. So before we keep going with the last 3, I'm going to take a quick break for today's sponsor of our show. Sit back, relax. I'm going to miss you for the 30 seconds that this thing rolls, and we'll hit you back shortly.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotou, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Welcome back from the break. I misspoke right before we got we transitioned to the commercial break. I said that there were 3 left. I believe there's only 2 left. I would say numbers are not my strong suit, but if that's the case, we got a lot of clients that are in a lot of trouble. So that is not the case. I just miscalculated. Also, it's worth noting that I am fasting for my colonoscopy tomorrow morning. So I am running low in the brain cell department. So if I misspeak on anything from here on out, that's my alibi. So the number 2, which is not a pun from the colonoscopy. It is the second biggest financial regret that Americans have, is taking on too much credit card debt, a whopping 15%. Now, breaking it down by generation, baby boomers 15%, Gen Xers 18%, millennials 16%, Gen Zers 11%. Now, maybe it's just me, but like the baby boomer things, that's more of a shock to me because of the amount of time and also what baby boomers have lived through. Because there comes a point where if you haven't figured it out, you haven't figured it out. But 15%, that's wild to me. Gen Xers, it's not as crazy because there's a lot of expenses that come in the midst of the heights of your career. If you decide to have kids, or regardless if you're buying a home or moving or you're getting a new job and you've got to take on some debt, or you're starting a company. So that isn't as shocking. Same thing with millennials. And shout out to the Gen Zers. Only 11% of you have a regret on that. So, maybe this ties into, before the break, the fact that a lot of Gen Zers feel the regret of not having enough emergency fund. And so because of that, it's this cycle in this circle, of, well, I didn't have enough emergency fund, so the last thing I'm going to do is get into a ton of credit card debt. I just think that's kind of fascinating. But for those of you that fit in this category of taking on too much credit card debt, and you're asking yourself, how do I get over this? How do I conquer this? There's a couple options. Number one, just simplistically, again, and we talk about this in my book ad nauseum, if you list out your debts, generally speaking, your credit card interest rate is going to be the highest interest rate debt that you have. And notice how I'm emphasizing interest rate. I do not care about the balance. I care about the interest rate, because that is the rate of return that you are earning on the debt that is owed. So for example, if a credit card debt today, and it says the average credit card debt, holy snot, is 25.5%. That is staggering. Newsflash, I and every professional out there cannot guarantee ever that you earn a 25% on your money. And anyone that says that is a liar and should be thrown in prison. So you want to make sure that anything that you have left over is going towards that credit card debt at that high interest rate. Of course, you got to make sure that you're getting your 401k match all squared away. And again, we talk about this within my book ad nauseum. But too much credit card debt, that can financially drain you. And then another option, we've seen this with a couple clients, where they cannot, for the life of them, climb out from under that. There are ways to consolidate your credit card debt and go from that super high interest rate to maybe a 12-month 0% strategy. Again, I'm not going to get into the weeds of that due to compliance, but if for whatever reason you've been listening in and you do have that high amount of credit card debt, I would strongly recommend that you go on, Google and look up consolidating your credit card debt, because there are companies out there that would do that in a heartbeat. Now, even though you would earn a 0% on your money, that's where I would say, even though you're earning 0%, you're still going to want to pay that thing off, because that credit card debt got you to where you are in the first place. And so once you clear all of that, then the question becomes, do you even need a credit card or not? And, I think the most successful people out there when it comes to money understand the value of a credit card, because you can earn, whether it's points or cash back on the money you're spending. But some people, from a responsibility standpoint, it's just not for them. So whether it's a debit card or you're just even paying with cash or checks, that might be the best option after your credit card debt is gone. Now, the number one Americans' biggest financial regret, not saving for retirement early enough, 21%. Now, this is not coming as a shock to me at all that Gen Zers, it's only 5% of you. No duh, you've got years until retirement, so you're probably not even thinking about it. Or if you are thinking about it, you're thinking about it as far as, oh, I'm going to retire, period. Like there's no real emotion behind it. I'll get to it when I get to it. Millennials, 11% of you. Gen Xers, 26%, and this is no shock to me whatsoever, 34% of baby boomers regret not saving for retirement early enough. So, am I shocked at this last one? No, not even remotely close. And I'm not shocked for a number of reasons. One, baby boomers, they have the most regret. 1 out of 3 baby boomers wish they started saving sooner. And I get why, because at that point, I'm not saying it's too late, but you've seen what the compounding has done for you over time, and the value of compounding sooner. I mean, it would have substantially increased your living situation. So just to give you an idea, I'm actually going to go through some numbers really quick on my calculator. And for those of you that are just listening in and not watching, I'm breaking out my HP 12C calculator because I'm a nerd. So let's say that you start with $0 today and you are investing $200 a month. Okay. And let's just say that you're going to earn a hypothetical 7% on your money, and you've got 20 years until you're going to need that. So at the end of 20 years, you would have $98,000. But let's say you do this for 30 years. You would have $226,000. And then if you waited for 40 years, you would have $479,000. And so just by doing the same thing, for you starting a decade earlier, I mean, all things being equal, you're going to have double that dollar amount and then some. And so, you know, for those of you that are baby boomers and you're listening in going, okay, you know, what do I take away from this? In a lot of ways, you can't go back and have a do-over with this, but you can educate those that are younger than you. You can educate the Gen Xers, not the 26% that already understand this regret, but the other, 74% of them that don't understand. You need to go tell every millennial and Gen Zer that you need to start saving now, like immediately. And I get it. The millennials out there and the Gen Zers are going to go, oh my God, like such a boomer, right? But it's going to be jokes on them when their net worth is like nothing by the time they retire. Now, if you're a Gen Xer, again, it's the same thing. For the millennials out there and the Gen Zers especially, I need to drill this into your head. If you are not putting in at the very, very minimum the match to your retirement plan where you work, by God, you need to do that now. You are leaving free money on the table. And even after that, just because, and this is a common misconception people have with retirement plans, which I don't understand where this misconception comes from. Maybe it's just the verbiage. A lot of people say, well, I'm maxing out my 401k. I go, oh, so you're putting in $23,000. Good for you. They're like, well, no, I'm just putting in the match. Isn't that the max? I'm like, no. The dollar amount that you can put in for 2024 is $23,000 if you are under 50. And then if you're 50 or over, it's $30,000. And the reason why I bring this up is if once you're putting money in up to the match, and we've talked about this in the past, if you are not systematically increasing your retirement plan contributions as you make more money, you are doing your future self a tremendous disservice. And so that really concludes today's episode on the Americans' Biggest Financial Regrets. It's interesting. Going through a lot of these, was I tremendously shocked? I was shocked at some of the nuances as far as the percentages based on different demographics generational differences regarding the regrets. But overall, it doesn't shock me because a lot of people, when they think about money, they start thinking about the importance of compounding their success when it's more often than not too late. And so the best thing that you can get out of today's episode is start saving for that emergency fund if you don't have it. Start minimizing your credit card debt if you've got a lot of it. If you are not in college yet, ask yourself, is it really worth it for you? Because it may be a trade school, or you may start a business and do it on your own. Because what if your profession doesn't need a post-high school degree? Fine. I am not shying away from education. You know, I've got my college degree. I've got my master's. I've got my boards with my certified financial planning boards, excuse me. And so, like, I'd be a hypocrite if I was like, oh, yeah, all education sucks. That is a huge farce. But you got to understand, does the calculation of taking out that loan really make sense for you in the long run? And I would say more often than not, the answer for most of you is going to be no. And that's okay. And if you have not thought about saving for, even forget the term retirement, because then people are like, oh, I won't get there till I'm old. Think about just saving for tomorrow. If you haven't thought about that, do it now. So that does it for today's episode. I appreciate you guys listening in as always. Thank you for joining me today. If you have questions about today's episode or any personal finance questions, please reach out to me at Cap and Capitalize on Instagram, Chris at capitalizeyourfinances.com, or via our website, capitalizepodcast.com. If you want more Capitalize Your Finances content, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com and check out our blog, free resources, book, and online course. As always, I'm your host, Chris Ray Panayiotou, Certified Financial Planning Professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. We cannot assure the accuracy or completeness of these materials. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There's no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. 401k plan information used is obtained from sources believed to be reliable as of the current date, but no representation is made as to its accuracy and completeness. Benefits may be subject to change at your employer's, the governing pensions, or benefit organization's discretion. Christopher A. Panayiotou is a registered representative with, and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Michael S. Fisher is not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capitalize Your Finances.